variance of prices among the funeral homes in the 5 counties that make up our service area. Travis and Williamson County are 2 of the 5. I think I brought you a sample page from the funeral home price survey that Kathy mentioned. It's an 11-page document. It's available on our website, and we can also mail it to you or email it to you, which is one reason that Alex and I gave you that little white piece of paper. We want to make sure that your questions are answered. And we'll certainly do our best to answer them while we're together this afternoon. But who knows, you may think of something afterwards when you're having dinner this evening or before you go to bed. There's, what? Ooh, don't you hate that? I wish I'd thought to ask her that. We talked about that several times when we were playing bridge, and I can't believe I forgot to ask. So that's what that white form is for. We want you to stay in touch with us. Anytime you have questions, you can email us or you can call our office. And that information also is on that pretty little 4-color card that I gave you with the Time Flies By image on it. And indeed it does. I'm really happy to be here. I always sort of feel like Westminster's home for more reasons now than I used to. Originally, it was because I've come and spoken here over the years several times. And then on August 9th, I had a fall, right? And now I have joined those of us that have a little metal in their bodies, and I have a titanium rod in my upper right leg, beautifully implanted by my surgeon. And I ended up doing some of my recovery, believe it or not, at Westminster Skilled Nursing Facility. And several people who are members of our affiliate came and visited me. So I want to let you know I'm still progressing. I've moved from a walker to a cane, and I am now wearing a safety belt during physical therapy, marching up and down the long highway, seems like a highway, without my cane. So I'm looking forward to a pretty thorough recovery. It was an interesting experience. It slowed my life down. Even the anesthesia that they gave me when they repaired my leg slowed me down for about 2 months. I kept saying, where's that Roger Rabbit energy that I usually have, that when I get excited about things, I start bouncing up and down, and it just wasn't there. And so it was my first experience with a situation like this, and also my first trip in an ambulance. So it was interesting being on the continuum where the things I know about, like what to do with bodies after people have died, I was in the pre-period where I was hospitalized. I didn't know the difference between the social worker and the caseworker, things like that. The face of the hospitalist kept changing from day to day. So I had quite a learning experience. And it's all in all been very beneficial to me, and I've learned a lot from this experience. So I want to introduce to you my wonderful friend Alex. Alex has a very interesting experience for someone of so many wonderful youthful years, and I will let her give you some highlights. But I have asked her, because she shares my passion for always learning more. We just love it when if we get a question that we can't answer, we can't get home fast enough. It's like, well, which rabbit hole should we go down tonight to find the answer to that question? Like, what happens if you die on a cruise ship? Do you know the answer to that one? It could be, that's an interesting possibility, but what we learned is most cruise ships have morgues. Yeah, isn't that interesting? So Alex and I are the kind of people that find that absolutely interesting. So it's a joy that she is now teaching my classes with me. I teach classes through the Lifetime Learning Institute. What to know before you go. And people think it's a travel, you know. Oh, well, it's a kind of travel, but not the kind that involves cruise ships. So Alex also will be co-presenting with me today, and I know that you will appreciate her knowledge and her enthusiasm as much as you kindly appreciated mine. Alex, tell them a little bit about your background.
Thank you guys for having me here. It's always a pleasure to do anything with Nancy. She is not only my friend, but a dear mentor, and has just been such an advocate for going down these deep dives with me. So it just makes me really excited to be here. I have over 12 years of end-of-life and funeral experience in the industry. I started off as a mortuary restoration specialist and went from working at different funeral homes to medical examiner offices. I've done transport. I did translation for a lot of early on in my career, doing kind of the funeral arrangement parts. I actually built the mobile morgues used during the COVID pandemic here for Central Texas. And I'm also an end-of-life doula and teach classes certifying doulas here in our community.
Just tell them a little bit what a doula is.
An end-of-life doula is a non-medical but trained individual who helps with end-of-life and funeral care. We go from spiritual, mental, really just holistic overall approach to dealing with end-of-life, from pre-diagnosis all the way to bereavement and after. Think of us as a companion there for you at the very end and beyond. That's kind of our approach, is making everything a lot easier and creating supportive systems, especially within our community, that not only support the individual, but also support the caregivers involved and the family as well.
Yeah, the doula work is a lovely complement to hospice. Even if you are or ever become a hospice patient, you'll find out that the hospice team comes and then they go, okay? The nurse comes to visit and then the nurse leaves. The social worker comes to visit, then the social worker leaves. So there's still a big gap in there that most of the caring burden falls on the caregivers who may be friends or family members, and having a doula come in as part of the care team can be really beneficial not only to the patient but to the family. So if you want more information about doula, just again on that white sheet that we've given you, just put something like, you know, more doula info, and we'll make sure that you have it.
And kind of to give you guys a little bit more of an idea, if you're familiar with a birth doula or a birth midwife, it is something very similar. We're helping you transition. Rather than coming into this world, we're helping you transition out of it. We are not regulated currently. That will change in the near future, I am sure. But what we enjoy about not being regulated right now is that we have way more flexibility than hospice and palliative care does to be more present. We're not limited in the amount of time that we have with each individual, and we are not a replacement for hospice or palliative. We are in addition to. We work alongside them as a care team to make sure that the individual is receiving full spectrum holistic care throughout.
Independent practitioners? Do people pay you directly for your services?
Yes, most doulas are independent contractors.
Not covered yet by Medicare, but I think the time will come when it will be. Okay, so let's...
One question.
Yeah.
That was my question. Is it covered by Medicare?
Not yet. There are a lot of regulations that are going to be put in place in the next few years, so we're really hoping that there will be more coverage.
Right. Yeah, the National hospice organization has a doula committee. They're working on ways in which to bring doulas into the more comprehensive care team. But it's a new concept, so it's made a lot of progress in the few years that the doulas have been around. University of Vermont, for example, has a doula training program, and then there are organizations that also train doulas. Anyway, what I want to do to start us off is just to make sure that you all are aware of what your rights are when you do have to deal with a funeral home. Okay, so let's start off with a big one. Is embalming required by law? That's right. Those of you that said no, please shout it out. No. No. Okay, good. Well, it's interesting, even though it is not required by law, typically if you do want funeral arrangements to include at any point an open casket where people coming to the visitation, for example, can see the deceased person's body, typically you will find a funeral home telling you, yes, we know it's not required by law, but it is our policy. Don't you love the word policy? It is our policy that we do not permit the public viewing of an unembalmed body. There is such a thing as a quick family viewing sometimes, even if a person is going to be cremated and there are not going to be any services beforehand. No visitation before the cremation, no funeral service. The funeral home will typically allow family members to come have a brief visit with the body of the deceased for final goodbyes and so forth, and they do not require or have a policy that the body needs to be embalmed for that.
There are typical regulations that they'll follow as far as keeping it to about 30-minute visitation and limiting to immediate family, where that's kind of the difference of a public visitation.
Yes, when I went and had a visit with my father's body after he died, he was not in a casket or in a visiting room at the funeral home. They actually took us around back, and he was on a gurney with a white sheet over his body. I mean, it's pretty informal. Okay. So now actually there are very few conditions that are contagious after the time of death. There are a few, and I don't want to drill so deep on all of these details that we can't cover the breadth of information we want to provide. But typically a body is not contagious. You don't have to worry about catching the disease from an unembalmed body. So some funeral homes will work with families who, for any number of reasons, do not wish to have a body embalmed, even though they do want a public viewing of the body. And this can be done with some thought and care by the funeral home prior to the visitation. Do you want to talk to them, Alex, about how that's done?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is planning in advance, preparing if there are certain things that you want to have more control of at the end. It's also something to keep in mind that once death occurs, it is no longer an emergency. From there, you do not need to rush to have the body then transferred to the funeral home. You are allowed that time to be present and to even be involved and participate in any post-mortem body care. So there is bathing the body, cleansing or changing the body into something more comfortable. Maybe grandma wanted to be buried in her nightgown. That's something that the family can choose to participate in. Kind of like Nancy said, the body is not immediately contagious because the body is dead now. There are practices that we take into place to make sure that we're still being safe and careful, but just that reminder that you have the ability to be present and to be active and to take that moment to be with the individual that has now passed on to the next transition.
This is especially true if a person passes away at home. Now, if a person passes away in a hospital, there could be some pressure from the hospital to, they need the bed, right? And so they will more urgently ask the family to select a funeral home and have the body removed there. But the point is, once the body gets to the funeral home, even if you want a viewing, you can tell the funeral director, look, I want you to do what you always do anyway and put this body in refrigeration, which it doesn't freeze the body, okay? The refrigeration room. It cools the body down to slow down the decomposition of the body. And there is a law in the state of Texas that says after death occurs, something must be done within 24 hours to keep the body from decomposing. And so refrigeration is the default alternative. So if the funeral home knows that you don't want embalming, they can set the features of the face when they take the body into their care and then put the body in refrigeration, and then when the visitation is going to occur, they take the body out of refrigeration, maybe an hour or two before the actual visitation service, and there you have it. And the body can be viewed that way. Now, some funeral homes will do that, and then other funeral homes will plant their feet in and say, no, the body has to be embalmed. So this is just one reason. This is an example of why, while you're still got your wits about you, to call a few funeral homes or go by a few funeral homes, because the Federal Trade Commission says, here's one of your rights as a funeral consumer. You have the right to walk into a funeral home, put your hand out and say, may I please have your price list? That's what we at the Funeral Consumers Alliance do every January and February. Is one way that we get the price list so that we can do our funeral home price survey is we walk into a funeral home and say, may I please have your price list? And the law says they have to give it to you right on the spot. Now, some of them, they want to establish a relationship with you, and they may say, I'll tell you what, why don't you come have a seat in our conference room, and I will send a funeral director in with the price list to talk to you about it. Now, you can agree to that if you want to, but the law says no conference is required. And believe me, when I go around and pick up 50 price lists, I haven't got time for conferences. I tell whoever I'm with, keep the engine running, right? I jump out of the passenger seat, literally, and, well, I used to run, now I walk. Walk into the funeral home, get the price list, say thank you very much, turn around, walk out, get back in the car, off to the next funeral home. And we all have the right to do that. So sometime if you just kind of feeling a little mischievous anyway, and you're driving by a funeral home, say, hey, let's stop here and get a price list. Really? That's the better time to do it, when you can kind of giggle. Okay, now listen, here's another good rule that's the law that's good to know. You can call them up and ask for prices. Now, it's helpful if before you call them, you know basically what kinds of arrangements you want. In other words, if you don't want a visitation or a funeral service, maybe you want a memorial service afterwards, after the burial or after the cremation. And in that case, it's so wide open, you don't need a funeral home at all for a memorial service or life celebration. You can have it right here in Harris Hall, or you can have it down at South Padre Island on the beach, or a restaurant, or anywhere you want to gather people together to share their memories of the person who passed away. So, once you kind of have in mind what would your ideal final arrangements be like, visitation, yes or no? Funeral service before the cremation or the burial, yes or no, okay? You kind of got your list of this is what I want. Then call the funeral home and say, you know, I've been thinking for a while about some final arrangements for myself, or you could say for a close friend of mine, whatever. And I want to sort of get a sense of what it would cost to do this. So then you start down your list. If we had a visitation at the funeral home, what would that cost? Okay, and they'll give you a figure. It's always good to say, and how many hours does that cover? Typically it covers 4. Okay, 4-hour visitation, what's that going to cost? Ka-ching, write that down, right? And if we have a funeral service at the funeral home, what would be your charge for that? And what do you charge to pick up the deceased person's body and transport it from the place of death to the funeral home? Okay? That's called the removal fee. What is your removal fee? These are examples of things. Now, a lot of people are interested in cremation. And I want to tell you, one of the tricky little things on funeral home price lists is when they get to the section where they show the price for cremation. Let's just take cremation without services beforehand. We'll just keep it simple, right? They go out, they pick up the remains, that's the removal. They take it to the funeral home or somewhere near a crematorium. They refrigerate, right? There's a law in Texas that says there's a 48-hour waiting period. Now again, there's a little footnote on that for some reason, some people sometimes can waive the 48-hour waiting period, but that's a long footnote. So just basically 48 hours minimum. Okay, refrigeration, then the body goes to the crematory. It's assigned a discrete number. There's a little metal tag, and the records at the crematory show what is that person's name and what is the number on the fireproof tag assigned to the body at the time that it goes to the crematory. Because that very same tag will be with the cremated remains when the family picks them up from the funeral home. That's how you know that you do have the ashes of the person that you think you do. Okay, so into refrigeration, then the cremation is scheduled, then it occurs, then the cremated remains are just made all nice and smooth. They're kind of like, a little bit like kitty litter in the way that they look, and put into a clear plastic bag with the little metal tag, and then that is put into a rectangular shaped plastic box. It's nothing fancy, okay, but it's just a box. It's typically green or brown or black. Those are the colors I've most often seen. And if you have not purchased an urn, maybe you want to wait a while and purchase a pretty urn. What you will pick up from the funeral home is the plastic box. That's what direct cremation is. Pick the body up, refrigerate it, cremate it, put the cremated remains in the plastic box, call the family, please come and get it. Now, interesting enough, when you start to look at the description of what direct cremation includes in each funeral home's price list, guess what? Sometimes it says crematory fee included. Sometimes it doesn't. Oops. So when we're doing the price list for our survey, we look very carefully at that details, what's included in the direct cremation. And if the crematory fee is not included, we look somewhere else on the price list, typically in a section of, well, since we don't have a crematory, we have to farm this out to somebody we have a contract with, and they charge, say, $480. So we at FCA add the $480 to the direct cremation charge that's listed on the price list, because we want people in the price chart to have the true out-the-door price. Imagine, you pick a funeral home that their direct cremation, you go like, wow, look at this is really affordable. And you go ahead and you call that funeral home to come and pick up the body and everything. And then when you sit down at the arrangement conference, you see that nice low price you saw on the price list, and then the next thing the funeral director says, and then there's the crematory fee. And you go like, huh? I mean, it just makes a huge difference. So these are the kinds of things, if you want to call a funeral home and get a cremation price from them, the most important follow-up question is, does that include the crematory fee? Now, I've had a few funeral directors waffle a little bit. Well, it all depends on which local crematory we use. And my rejoinder for that is, well, let's just go ahead and pretend that we're actually planning the funeral today. What price would you come up with? And they'll give you a price.
Another price to consider would be the refrigeration cost. Some funeral homes do charge per day for refrigeration. Others include X amount of time of refrigeration. So that would be the next follow-up question, is what is the charge for refrigeration, or how much is included?
Now, interestingly enough, funeral homes are not required by law to mail a price list to you or even to send it to you as an email attachment. The law just says pick it up in person or call them, what is your price today for, and then you tell them what you want, and then they give you the prices. And we suggest you call at least 3 funeral homes. Now, Alex is going to hand out to you a sample page from our funeral home price survey, so you can see some columns in it that I'm going to refer to. Now, again, the full survey is on our website, and our website is all over the materials that we're giving you today. And you just go to the home page, fcactx.org, and look for the big yellow button, big yellow circle right there on the home page.
Nancy,
Yes.
why would we need to go check these different funeral homes when we have your survey?
Well, for one thing, this is a massive job. We're talking about 50 funeral homes in 5 counties. And not only picking them up or obtaining them, but then crunching the figures and making sure the crematory fee is included and just all kinds of stuff, right? We do it in January and February, and then we don't do it again until the following January and February. By the time you get to November and you're looking at the price list, you need to be aware that funeral homes can change their price list at any time. They could change it every month if they wanted to. And so there's a chance that the funeral home price survey does not in November or on May 24th have the actual current price. So this is another question. If you have the funeral home price survey, and don't forget, by the way, when you're asking for costs, they also have what they call the basic services fee or the professional services fee, which is supposed to cover their overhead, paying the staff, paying the answering service, keeping the water and the water fountain flowing, ensuring the fleet of vehicles, and that kind of thing. So when you call, you want to also, when you're pricing out whatever arrangements you think you might want, be sure to ask for the basic services fee. So now let's look at this chart, and you will see when you go to the one that's on the website, if you click on the hot links on the website version, I mean, you can print it, but you can also just open the document up and you go to the name of the funeral home, and you'll see it's in blue and it's underlined, which means it's a hot link. Just go click, click, and you'll go right out to the website of that funeral home. So that's an advantage to actually looking at the survey on the website, is it will take you to the funeral home's website. Now, just one more thing. You'll notice there is an effective date column. You see that? Effective date? That helps you not get into an embarrassing situation where you're calling for prices in November and they give you whatever funeral home it is, they give you a different price than what you see on our survey. The next question is, oh, by the way, what is the effective date of the price list from which you're giving me these prices? And right away, if there is a discrepancy, it's because the effective date is different from the effective date of the price list that we use for the survey. Yes, sir, you had a question?
Yes. Let's say that you made funeral arrangements, a rather elaborate funeral with any one of these funeral homes, and you change your mind and you decide that you want to be cremated and have a much more simple funeral service. You have signed some papers earlier that you gave the funeral home. Do you have to go back and get those papers? I mean, they don't.
Did you give them any money?
No.
Okay, so you pre-planned, but you did not prepay.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's just like an old, outdated advance directive. You know, that's what I wanted 17 years ago, but let's talk about what I want now. Just pull those papers out of the file and tear them up.
And you don't even have to go to the
No.
funeral home, just let it die.
No, just let it die. Yeah, you're welcome. Now, sometimes people buy a prepaid funeral contract. Everything a typical member of the public would do, I did it, okay? I bought, way back when, before I became involved with this organization, like 25 years ago, I bought a prepaid funeral contract for a direct cremation for $1,000. And it ends up being an insurance policy in this case. And I got the insurance policy and I made my monthly payments and so forth, and I got the whole thing paid off, and I'm still alive. And in the meantime, a more affordable funeral provider came into town, $595. Well, I want what I want, but I don't want to have to pay more than I have to pay to get what I want. So guess what? I got lucky. I called the insurance company that had sold me, or it was, the funeral home sold me the policy, but the policy was with the insurance company. And I said, I've changed my mind, I want different arrangements, I don't need this anymore. And they sent me what's called a surrender form. And I filled out the form, put the policy, I'm very, anything to do with money, I keep the papers. Don't lose the papers. I can't tell you how many times we get a call. I think Grandma had a pre-need, but we can't find the papers. And we don't know what funeral home it was with. Well, that was money down the drain. So I boxed up the policy with a surrender form. I mailed it to the insurance company. Not only did they send me back my $1,000, but also the interest that it earned over the years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish everybody could always be that lucky. So that's why I asked you if you had given them money, because then it gets more interesting. So as far as pre-needs, there's insurance company policies, and then there's what's called trust-funded policies. Do you know, you want to talk about trust funded? You know about that? A little bit?
More on the beneficiary on death.
Yeah.
That's kind of more where I'm familiar with. You
Yeah.
want to touch on that?
Well, it's like the money goes into a trust that's held by the state instead of being an insurance policy, but basically monthly payments and so forth and so on. Oh, and by the way, like in that insurance policy, I could also have changed the beneficiary. I could have said, oh, that funeral home that I bought the policy from, I want a different funeral home now, and you give them, so like if you die in Colorado, and you bought a pre-need insurance-funded policy here with a Texas funeral home, you can arrange to have the beneficiary of your policy changed. You don't have to pay an enormous amount of money to have your body brought back to Austin so you can take advantage of your pre-need. Instead, you tell the funeral home in Colorado, I have a policy, so what we need to do is contact the insurance company and change the beneficiary. So the money will go to the Colorado funeral home rather than the one in Austin. Okay, so, yes.
If you prepay for a funeral, does that lock the funeral home in on those prices, or?
Yes.
Come back later?
They can upsell you. Okay, sometimes, okay, a person picks out, like they're arranging for their funeral to happen tomorrow. Pick out, oh, I like this casket. I want a blue 18 gauge casket. I want a visitation. I want this, that, and the other thing. And they pay to have that, even if they die 17 years, I don't know why I'm stuck on 17. 17 years later, the funeral home has to come up with a comparable blue 18 gauge casket, have the visitation at the funeral home and so forth. Now sometimes people buy a pre-need and they pick some very simple things. Like they pick a simple pine coffin. That's what they want, simple pine coffin. Well, when the family goes in with the pre-need policy, the funeral home is obligated to provide a simple pine coffin or something very comparable, but it's not unheard of for a funeral home to say, well, you know, your mom, she just always was wanting to put money aside so that kids could go to college and stuff, and so she probably really thought it was imprudent to spend a lot of money on a coffin, so she picked a pine coffin. But when you look back and think of all the sacrifices that she made and all the things that she did for you and the grandkids, what don't you think maybe something with a satin lining etc., and so forth, might be more befitting, and they can upsell you, and then you pay at the time of the funeral arrangements the difference figure. They'll never downsell you. But it's not unheard of that they would try to upsell you.
That was actually one of the comments made by funeral homes in their defense was they like to get families in so that they can paint this beautiful picture of what did mom want? And you tell them everything that mom wanted, and now you have this dream funeral planned. And by the way, that's $35,000. Most people feel almost embarrassed at that point to say, I'm not going to go into debt to pay for this elaborate funeral that would be so perfect for mom. That's part of the reason we tell you guys to plan in advance, to think about your options, and to talk to your family members so that they also understand that mom really meant she wanted the pine casket and didn't want the satin upsell. These are kind of the things that we want you guys to be aware of, because that is what is in the playbook. That's what they're getting you to come in and to share all of these personal moments to then sell you what is fitting to that. And that's what we're trying to prevent. There's no need to go into debt to bury your loved ones. There are options out there, and you can still make a beautiful personalized service without having to go into debt.
Yeah, keep in mind, we're sitting here right now talking about this, and it's just a lovely Friday afternoon. Maybe you had a really nice lunch. You've got some nice plans for the evening. It's just a typical, hopefully wonderful day. That's probably not the frame of mind that you're going to be in if you have to make funeral arrangements for someone you're close to. As a friend of mine said, you can prepare and prepare and prepare, but you're never really ready. And so emotionally, when people go to a funeral home, they're very vulnerable. And I'll tell you what, if you think of it, it would be a wonderful thing to take someone that was not maybe a close blood relative of the deceased, maybe a close friend of yours, someone that you trust, that voice of reason. Take somebody that is not in emotional turmoil with you to the funeral home to ask questions that today you would think of it, but at the time of making the arrangements, when your mind has sort of turned to mush, you're not going to sit there and take out the notes that you may be taking today. It's just not going to happen. And so it's really a wonderful thing to have somebody go with you that is not in a state of emotional turmoil.
Nancy, I have a testimony about caskets.
Okay.
Think of them as a permanent place that mom will lie in. I had a crazy mother-in-law. She wanted her husband moved from where he had been buried 7 years after his burial and moved to a common burial, a drawer. And so they dug him up, and that casket was crumpled. I mean, they could deteriorate fairly rapidly. It was no point in putting a lot of money in that box.
That's true. Okay, caskets, no matter what they're made of, eventually the casket will deteriorate, but also there will be gaps in the casket as it deteriorates, and water from rainfall and so forth will get inside the casket, even if it has one of those sealers like Tupperware, you know, metal caskets. They call them gaskets. The gasket on the casket. And it looks like the metal casket with sealer around it is invincible, but nothing over a period of time is invincible. And the body is meant to deteriorate. Embalming is not a permanent thing like being an Egyptian mummy, okay? Embalming kind of gets you through, the first few days or weeks or whatever, but even then, embalmed bodies just do start to decompose. And all in all, it's a good thing. People that like natural burial in green cemeteries, they're counting on it. That's what they want. They want everything that goes into the ground, including the container or the shroud. You ever heard of shrouds? You know, you can, if grandma's old quilt that the family loves, if all the materials, including the stuffing of the quilt, are biodegradable, that can be used as a shroud. Talk to them a little bit about green burial, Alex.
So that's a big difference too. In conventional funerals and conventional burials, you are getting a casket that is, you know, a metal casket with the gasket, and then you're getting the casket put in a vault, a concrete vault in the ground, and you're burying it at 6 feet. And you're really trying to keep it sealed and not let anything come in to fasten decomposition. Whereas green burial, we're actually burying you at 3.5 feet, because that is the perfect environment to help the soil and all of the ecosystem there contribute to the organic breakdown of the body and nourishing the earth within it. That 3.5 feet also prevents animals from coming and digging up anything. It also prevents the smell from occurring. So 3.5 feet, that's our magic number for natural burial. That's where we want you, because that's where you're going to really go back in and return to earth as naturally as possible. And like Nancy said, we've had individuals that have opted. You have the choice of buying a shroud that is available online, something we didn't talk about, but that you have the right to, is buying your own casket or urn from a third-party provider. You have that right. And you can choose a casket from Amazon, from Costco. Websites. You can't walk into Costco and select openly. But you can look online, Sam's Club, Walmart, all of these major companies sell caskets and urns. On their websites. And you can compare there, but you can also purchase shrouds from other providers. We've had individuals, we had a woman who was going to bury her husband, and she wanted him shrouded in their bed sheet. It was all natural, so it worked perfectly, but she said, we have made love here, we have cried here, we have laughed here, we have done it all here. I want him shrouded in our love. And that is what he was shrouded in. He was shrouded in their bed sheet, and that cost nothing. But it was such a personalized action that was able to really help this family. So you have that choice. Yes, ma'am. So there are actually a couple of different providers in town that offer green burials or natural burials. Excuse me, that's my alarm to pick up my daughter, but she's out of school now. Yeah, so there are some providers in town. In our cemetery price sheet, we actually have a couple of different options here locally. Something that we also like to kind of stress to you guys is you're only going to this location once. You're not going to be playing bridge every Monday. So some of these locations are a little further away, but remembering that this is kind of a one-time trip, to keep that in mind. The closest locations, there is one in Cedar Creek called Eloise Woods, and it is very much like a woodland kind of environment. So Eloise Woods in Cedar Creek. There is Campo de Estrellas, which is a conservation cemetery that just opened up closer to Smithsville, I believe. They just opened up, so conservation cemetery, meaning that they're conserving the land. So not only is it green and natural, but they're really priding themselves in keeping up with the landscape and conserving the natural habitat there. And then we have Our Lady of the Rosary. In Georgetown, which is a hybrid cemetery. And some of these hybrid cemeteries, what they offer is, in the conventional cemetery, they are still using vaults and caskets as normal, but they're offering different areas in their property, in the cemetery grounds, for more natural burial. And some of these hybrid cemeteries will either just inter 3.5 feet for natural burial, and some of them opt to have the vault inverted, almost like a shoebox. You flip the shoebox upside down so that the individual or the casket is still touching the earth, but the vault is still in place. And the reason vaults are used is to keep the landscape manicured. It helps with cutting the grass and just keeping the land very even. That's the reason for vaults in most cemeteries. So in some hybrid cemeteries, they'll just flip the vault so that you're still touching the earth. So if you're concerned about any of that, you just want to ask what their process is in a hybrid cemetery. And then natural and green cemeteries don't require vaults at all. The closest one to us would be, well, and it's kind of outside of our area, is Countryside Memorial Park. And that's more like a meadow. It's surrounded with cows and horses. I highly suggest you look at all of them and figure out what it is that is best for you. They are very different from each other, and they vary a little bit in price, but they are typically more affordable than conventional burials, which range right now average from $8,000 to $10,000 with no elaborate add-ons, whereas a natural burial is typically under $5,000.
So if you want more information about green burial, or you want the names and websites of the cemeteries that Alex just mentioned, on that little white slip of paper that we gave you when you came in, just put green burial info and tell us if you want us to email it to you, mail it to you, or a phone call. But we will provide more details about anything that we're touching on today.
Did you have a question, Kate?
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
Can you have visitations to a green burial?
Absolutely. For a green or natural burial, a lot of it is really giving the family a lot of freedom. We tend to call these kind of services family-directed services because it gives you a lot more leniency to be involved as little or as much as you want. I think there's a big misconception with green burial that if I'm getting a green burial, that means my family is gonna have to dig the hole themselves and then put the dirt back in, and they're gonna have to do it all, and I don't know if my parents or my siblings or my kids are gonna wanna do that. But that's not true. We kind of like to give you the example of there's shades of green. There is a variety of options to make it as green as you want and as green as is possible for what is right for you. So you don't have to have your family dig the hole. You can if you want, but there are different options. So a lot of this is more flexibility and gives the family more advantage of being as involved as they want.
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. Typically at a green cemetery, the family will ask the cemetery manager to have someone come out with a backhoe and open the grave. Okay, that's the hard part, especially because we do have a lot of rocks in our soil, so digging can be quite laborious. But then at the time that the body is brought to the plot that's been opened, the family can be involved in lowering. There's a way to do that. There's straps underneath the pallet that the body has been brought on, and put the body in, say whatever they want to say, put some flowers in there and so forth. And then many families actually, they don't necessarily want to completely fill the grave, but they want to put some dirt in there themselves. They may do it, one cemetery, the one down in Lavernia, Countryside Memorial, actually has what, gold shovels? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or you might want to use your hands. just kneel down and pick up some earth and put it in the grave. You know, it's sort of a symbolic gesture. So the family can do that if they want to, and friends can do that. And then the person that opened the grave can also finish closing it.
That is a typical cost that is associated with conventional burial or green burial, is the opening and closing of the grave. That is typically not something that you can pay in advance for, because it's typically a third party that they're using to do the opening and closing. So a cemetery service provider would be doing that. And so it ranges on the price. Sometimes it's more expensive on a weekend than during the week. So those are things to consider, and just remembering that you can ask about those prices and ask, what is the cost today?
You know, it's interesting for cemetery, we talk about buying a plot or purchasing a plot, but really what you're doing is purchasing the right to inter in the plot. In other words, the ground, the actual ground, continues to belong to the cemetery, and you're purchasing the right to inter. And some people, they'll just buy a plot for including the grandkids, you know? Way back when, they buy like 8 plots. Who knows when those 8 people, maybe they got initiated because one person in the family passed away, but then there are 7 people still living in pretty good health of various ages. Who knows what the labor cost of opening and closing the plot will be at the time that the death actually occurs, which is why typically when you buy a cemetery plot, the price will not include the opening and closing. Now, there are exceptions. It's a good question to ask if you're thinking about buying cemetery plots. But I will tell you one thing. If you move, good luck selling cemetery plots. Now, there are cemetery plot brokers, believe it or not, B-R-O-K-E-R-S, that have websites of people with plots to sell in certain locations and so forth, and they match them up for a fee with buyers who naturally do not want to pay the full ticket price of what you may have paid when you purchased the plot. And then tangentially related, if you have a family member that's an honorably discharged veteran with a DD 214, burial or urn, the veteran cemeteries these days, they have columbariums, or for Latin scholars, a columbaria, with niches for cremation urns. So you can be buried in a veteran cemetery, or your urn can be put into a columbarium niche. But with a DD 214, once that urn or that casket crosses into the cemetery, the VA pays for everything. I think that's important to know, including the burial of a spouse. Now, if the spouse was also a veteran, then the graves can be side by side. But if one spouse was the veteran and another spouse or child 18 or younger is involved, not a veteran, they bury, believe it or not, up and down. Did you know that? Yeah, they bury this way, but side by side if both spouses were veterans. But the point is the VA pays for everything, including a lovely memorial service and the taps and the whole thing. There's a state veteran cemetery in Killeen. That, I guess, driving-wise, is the closest to where we are now. And then there is Fort Sam Houston down in San Antonio. Now, and of course there's Arlington. I mean, I've dealt with families that the spouse has been buried in Arlington, but wherever it is, typically the family does need to pay the transportation cost to get the casket up to Colleen or down to San Antonio. They can easily transport it themselves if it's an urn. The same thing, if you want to take an urn on an airplane, because you have a family burial plot in Minnesota, so you want to put grandma's urn in a plot up in Minnesota, you can carry it on with your carry-on onto an airplane, but you have to make sure it's in a container that the airport X-ray can see through the container. So if it were in, for example, a marble urn or an urn that had a stainless steel lining that the camera can't see through the urn, they won't let you carry it on, and they sure as heck won't open it right there among all the shoes and the knives and all that stuff. Oh yeah, let's just open this up. It's not going to happen. So if you think you'd like to take an urn on an airplane, I would call the airline specifically, because they vary a little bit from one to another. Call Southwest and just say, I have an urn I want to take up to St. Paul. What are your policies? And they'll spell it out for you.
I think we had a couple questions.
Yeah,
Yes, on that thing of taking it on the airplane.
airplane.
Now you can put the cremains in a plastic tube.
Uh-huh.
Can that plastic tube be taken in your carry-on luggage?
Again, I guess it depends. I think that the camera can see through plastic, but I would call the airline. They're the ultimate authority.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious how the green cemeteries keep track of the burial sites. Do they mark them somehow?
Yes, so most of them have natural ground markers that they use.
This is how you keep track of where the plot is in a green cemetery.
Yeah, and they also have a map that they mark individually. So all of it is tracked. Each cemetery has a little bit of a different system. Like at Countryside Memorial Park, she actually is an artist herself, the owner, Sunny Markham, and she hand makes all of the markers. And so each burial has to purchase a marker, and then she'll create it and have it on there, but it's all natural stone. Other places will use like GPS trackers as well to help mark the graves. So there's a whole tracking system that they have.
Yeah, most green cemeteries typically, you can have a very simple marker. Like Alex said, one made of natural stone, but you can't have like a statuary, big tall angel, you know, that the kinds of things you see in conventional cemeteries, or you know, the big headstone. Those things you will not see in a green cemetery. But it doesn't mean that there's no way whatsoever to mark the grave. But GPS is very, very reliable.
Yeah,
Yes.
on the, like, for Fort Sam Houston, you know, I guess I just want to make sure everybody knew that you don't have a choice of marker, really. They furnish the marker,
Mm-hmm.
but it's their design.
Yeah.
Right.
It keeps it all uniform. But
Right.
And there's usually also a wait for veteran burials, just because of the different amounts of people that are going that way. It all has to be scheduled. So sometimes the service might not take place immediately. It might actually be months before the actual burial occurs. And in that time, the body either is embalmed or refrigerated until then.
Interestingly enough, for these services at veteran cemeteries, they will have sort of like a place, a chapel, a memorial place, or whatever. That's where the service takes place, and they play the taps and so forth and so on. But the family is not permitted to go to the actual grave site. the plot, has been my understanding. That they just stay up at the memorial place or the chapel, but they do not go to the actual plot for the placement of the casket in the grave.
Nancy and Alex, I wonder if you'd like to take a few more questions from people if they randomly come up and talk to you. Because the afternoon is rolling on, and some people want to get out of town and have graduations to go to. And we're not hastening anybody leaving, so you can stay there all evening. if you like.
Yeah, we'll stay as long as you like, but
So
on the
if you
other
have
hand,
any questions, concerns, please avail yourself. But thank you both very, very much for coming in today.
You're welcome.
Kathy is the most helpful person. If you have one of those white slips that you want us to follow up with you about any questions you have, you know, who knows, maybe you want to know about, well, what about whole body donation for medical research or training? That's a fascinating topic. Jot your questions down and let us know how to get in touch with you. And Kathy, honey, would you be willing to pick those questionnaires up?